I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with you. So presentation we have today is about making great bird photography, mainly meant for beginner to intermediate folks out there. So if we haven't met before, my name is Matt Kloskowski. I think I have a little slide here that we'll talk about that. But I'm going to turn my camera off. I'm going to hide all that stuff to give you guys as much screen real estate as possible. Also, keep in mind the video player where you're watching this. If you hover around and guys, you can do photography. You can do probably photo editing. You can figure out the video player here. There's a full screen icon on just about every video player in the world. So poke around, click around, you'll be able to go full screen if you want. You can hide the chat window. There's different ways to customize it, but hopefully that'll help give you whatever experience you're looking for there. Let me hide myself. Share my screen. There we go. Okay, so let's get started here. Now, hold on a second. There we go. Okay, so my name is Matt. If we haven't met before, you can find me over at mattkay.com. I do online courses, I got presets, I got workshops, all that fun stuff. So that's a good place to keep in touch and find out a little bit more if you're interested. To make this a little bit more lively, if you see me do something really cool, like we'll do a little editing toward the end, but it's really meant for anything. If you see something cool, call it out in the chat, like make it interactive, because I find it keeps everybody interested. And also sometimes it helps people learn, because what I find is sometimes people don't realize that others are learning as well. Sometimes we get too often, we think like we're the only one that doesn't know stuff. So it also puts you at ease there. This is more for hobbyist, enthusiast bird photographers. I don't know what a professional bird photographer looks like in 2021. Anybody that makes a professional career from it. So I talk to mostly people that just enjoy it as a hobby. And, a lot of people, again, to put you at ease, a lot of people is the first thing when somebody emails me, they'll say, oh, Matt, I'm just an enthusiast. I'm just somebody that's everybody, guys. That's every bird and wildlife photographer out there. So, so keep in mind, that's who this content is meant for. What we'll cover, we'll start off with some settings and we'll talk a little bit about gear. I'll do some tips and examples. If we got some time at the end, I'll even do a couple of editing tips as well. So let's kick this off with settings. And this is going to be pretty cool because I'm going to do a little bit of a mix of me here live with you, but some pre-recorded videos that I really wouldn't be able to do live. So I'm going to intermix these in, and I think they'll help. And they're through the camera lens. So I think they'll really help, get some of these points home. So basic settings, I always suggest the RAW format. And if you're shooting a mirrorless or DSLR, it just gives you the most leeway. If you do shoot JPEG, I always tell people put it on in your camera. You can put it on Adobe RGB. If you shoot RAW, it doesn't matter. That color format doesn't matter if you shoot RAW, but if it's JPEG, it just gives you the most bang for your buck there. High frame rates for bird photography, so check your manual on how to do that for your specific camera, but your frames per second, generally we're going to want that to be up there pretty high, because we're trying to give ourselves the best opportunity to pick from multiple wing positions and gestures and whatnot. Exposure. So this is going to seem a little bit intimidating for people that are not used to manual exposure. But what I'm going to show you is we are going to turn manual exposure mode, and I'm not talking about focus. Keep in mind there's a big difference between manual focus, manual exposure. But I'm going to show you how this is going to become almost auto for you. So I'm going to be in manual focus or manual exposure mode. I'm generally going to set my aperture to the lowest f-stop possible. And then people will always say, well, what about if the eye, if the wing's in focus and the eye's in focus? So guys, if you're that close, man, it's going to be really difficult for you to try to mess around with aperture to get something in focus and out of focus. So for all intents and purposes, for most of our bird photography, when you focus just about anywhere on the bird, the rest of the bird is going to be in focus. If you are close enough, then yes, you can maybe adjust that if you want. But for the most part, we're going to be at the lowest f-stop possible. And I can tell you that it's, maybe 1% of the time will I ever change that. We're going to control the shutter speed and we're going to control the ISO. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about some of those settings when in relation to perched versus flight. So for perch, remember, we're going to be on manual exposure mode, lowest f-stop possible, lowest f-stop number that we can get to. And I'm generally, as a shutter speed, going to be 1 over the focal length that I'm shooting for handheld stuff. So if you're shooting at 400th of a second, I'm going to be at 1/400th. If you're shooting at 800th of a second, I'm going to be at 1/800th of a second. And that's because we can't handhold those long lenses and those long focal lengths at much less. Now, I'm not going to say I never try to work my way down, and I do, and I would always suggest that for you guys. Start high, get it sharp, and then work your way down. If 1/800th of a second requires a very high ISO and you get the shot, then maybe go down to 400th and 250th, and you can work your way down a little bit there. But for perched, I'm going to be generally 1 over the focal length, and I'll go up as high as 1/1000th if I have the light, if it's bright out and I can do it. I know that 1/1000th is going to take care of me moving the camera. Birds in flight, a little bit different. Now, for me, the biggest culprit that I see over the years is people won't use enough shutter speed. Okay. And so I'm going to suggest somewhere between 1/2000th to 1/3200th, maybe 1/1600th. So your larger birds, your pelicans, your herons, large egrets, those types of birds, yeah, I might get away with 1/16 to 1/30, 1/1600 to 2000th of a second. But for your birds that move a little bit faster, eagles can move over 70 miles an hour. So your larger birds, your ospreys, your eagles, your raptors, and then also depending on what the bird's doing. It's not to say that heron that looks like it's lumbering through the air and just floating, it's not to say that bird can't move fast at certain times when it wants and when it takes a dive or when it's in the water looking for a fish. So just to say because it's a big bird and it happens to be moving slow at some point, I can tell you when I walk out the door, my camera's at 1/3200th of a second. Strictly, if you look through my website, you're going to see almost everything in flight shot at 1/3200th of a second, sharp before anything. And then you're going to raise the ISO to get the correct exposure. So remember, you set your aperture, you set your shutter speed. The only variable that's left is ISO, and you're going to raise that to get the correct exposure, which is where auto ISO comes into play, because that will take care of raising it for you. So I've got a little video demonstration here I'm going to cut to. Just give me a second to cue that up for you here. So this will hopefully help make that option or make that setting a little bit more easier to understand for you if you haven't used it. To very quickly demonstrate single and continuous focus modes, let me show you what I mean here. So I've again got I've just got a photo up on my computer screen, and it's just fun to see that it's a great way to practice because the camera still works. But right now I am on AFS, or single focus, okay? Which means when I press the shutter, right, it's going to find focus using whatever focus area I've told it to, and that's a separate video, but it's going to find focus. Right? So it found focus on the bird's eye. Now, even as I recompose, right, there's a lens sitting right in front of the computer there. Even as I recompose, it's not changing because I have my finger pressed on the shutter. So if I was continuously taking pictures right now, the camera would still continue to focus in that one spot. All right. Even if I start taking pictures over there, okay, you can see here, let it grab focus again. Okay, here, let's. Okay, and I'm going to take pictures, and you actually see kind of a little blinking on the screen there. See, it's not changing focus over to the lens. Now, let's go ahead and switch us into AFC. Okay, so now I'm in AFC mode, and you're immediately going to see the difference because the camera is going to Bear with me there for a second, guys. I think I queued up. I think I queued up the wrong video. Wait 1 second. Let me queue up the right video for you. I'm pointing at my computer right now with a photo of birds up, which is pretty cool because it engages autofocus. It even will engage eye autofocus if I wanted to. So it's kind of fun. It's a fun way to practice and see what the camera will do. But let's talk a little bit about that manual exposure mode that I was talking about, okay? I have control over my aperture, all right? So right now it's at the lowest aperture setting for this lens combo that I have on. I believe I have a teleconverter on as well. Now I can make that f-stop number higher, which is going to let less light into the camera, which is why the photo is getting darker because I'm in manual exposure mode. If I was in aperture priority mode, the camera would automatically pick a shutter speed and it would make that shutter speed longer and longer and longer, which is not what I want for my birds, okay? I don't want that shutter speed to get longer as I change my aperture. Now, that would really never happen because essentially what I'm going to do is keep it on the lowest f-stop number I can for the entire bird outing. I don't really have any reason to change that, okay? So it's gonna be at the lowest f-stop number. And then right now I'm at a slower shutter speed where I would say, okay, if they're perched, I might try to use this, maybe a little bit faster, but I might try to go this way. But if I think they're gonna take flight or I switch situations and action happens somewhere else, then I can go in and I can start to raise my shutter speed to be exactly what I want it to be. Now, how does the camera compensate? Well, it's in manual mode, so it just shows me a darker photo because again, I'm letting less light in. So then I go into ISO and I can just change my ISO setting here, okay? All the while, I have that histogram up in my screen. On my camera, it lets me have that little histogram up in the bottom corner. So all the while, I'm monitoring that as I'm shooting. And if I start to make my shutter speed longer and longer, you'll see that histogram starts to spike up on the right-hand side. So that's my cue. If I see that, I know I just have to bounce over to my ISO and I know I can lower my ISO and get it back down to a lower number to get me a good exposure. So it's a nice way of retaining control over the situation, especially for bird photography. Shutter speed is so important, okay? Shutter speed is really, for me, the most important part of all this. So I need to make sure I have the ability to dial in exactly the shutter speed I want, also exactly the aperture I want, and then I just use ISO as a way to get me a good exposure depending on those two other settings. Now, in another example, I just wanted to quickly demonstrate auto ISO, and you can see what's happening here. So I've gone in my camera and turned on auto ISO, and you'll see on the lower bottom part of the screen there, I have my limits there. So I can set the lowest limit and the highest limit of what I want the ISO to be able to go to. All right, so what's gonna happen now? Okay, I want you to watch. I've got my aperture dialed in, and I've got a shutter speed dialed in. I'm going to press the shutter halfway down and it's going to show you what the ISO is right now given the current framing of the photo. Okay, so now let's say I think the birds are going to take flight. I just put my thumb onto the dial that changes shutter speed and I start to raise that shutter speed, and you'll notice, different from the previous example, see how the photo exposure is not changing? It's staying exactly the same. Well, take a look at what happened. I'm going to press down halfway on the shutter again. See, my ISO is now 8,000, okay? If I go a little bit faster, I press halfway down. See, now it's at 12,000. Now, if I start to go faster and faster, I'm gonna get a darker and darker photo. The camera said, hey, he said, don't go above 12,800, so the only way to compensate is to just leave the ISO where it is and you'll get a darker exposure. But as I reduce that setting, okay, I'll go back down to a slower shutter speed, press halfway down, see now ISO 2000. And as you move around, that'll change. You can actually see the ISO changing as I change the framing here, okay? So that's auto ISO can be very, very useful, especially if you're in a situation where the light is changing quite often and you don't want to have to worry about it. Okay, there's video number one. Sorry about the little mishap there on getting the correct video to play. Let's go ahead and continue on here. So we took care of one aspect of it, which is exposure. And I know I said it before, but for a lot of you, if you haven't used manual exposure, sometimes it sounds really scary. You just made manual mode automatic. You literally, like, you don't have to do a thing. It is all done automatically for you. And by the way, for most cameras in auto ISO, you can adjust exposure compensation. So if the photo happens to be too bright or too dark, you still have your exposure compensation to override it. Not all cameras, where typically in manual mode, exposure compensation does work, but once you're in autofocus or auto ISO mode, it does. Okay, so now we got a couple of other things here where we need to talk about focus. There's two areas of focus that we need to be aware of to get this sharp photo. All right, we've got exposure, and keep in mind, exposure has nothing to do with focus. So now we have to get over into focus. So we've got a focus mode, and then we've got focus area. Focus mode's pretty simple. We don't have to mess with that too much. But essentially, you have single focus mode or you have continuous focus. Sometimes continuous will be referred to as servo. I believe Canon refers to it as servo, but essentially all you're saying is how often is the camera focusing? Okay, so I've got another video, and in fact, you saw part of this before because I played this one before when I shouldn't have, but let's go ahead and we will take a quick look at that one. To very quickly demonstrate single and continuous focus modes, let me show you what I mean here. So I've again got my I've just got a photo up on my computer screen, and it's just fun to see that it's a great way to practice because the camera still works. But right now I am on AFS, or single focus, okay? Which means when I press the shutter, right, it's gonna find focus using whatever focus area I've told it to, and that's a separate video, but it's gonna find focus, right? So it found focus on the bird's eye. Now, even as I recompose, right, there's a lens sitting right in front of the computer there. Even as I recompose, it's not changing because I have my finger pressed on the shutter. So if I was continuously taking pictures right now, the camera would still continue to focus in that one spot, all right? Even if I start taking pictures over there, okay, you can see here, let it grab focus again. Okay, here, okay. And I'm going to take pictures, and you actually see kind of a little blinking on the screen there. See, it's not changing focus over to the lens. Now, let's go ahead and switch us into AFC. Okay, so now I'm in AFC mode, and you're immediately going to see the difference because the camera is going to start moving around, and it's going to start, even as I pan around, it's going to show different focus areas that it's picking up on the ducks here. Okay, as I move over to the lens, eventually it's going to grab focus over on that lens. Okay, it's continuously focusing. I have the shutter pressed halfway down, so it's continuously focusing here. Again, I'll go back over there. It grabs focus on the birds. Go back over here, it's going to grab focus on the lens there, okay? And as I start shooting, watch, I'm going to start taking some pictures here. You're going to see the flashing on screen, and I'll start panning over to the ducks, and you'll see it moves, all right? Ready? See that? So it moved over. It's continuously focusing. It's continuously trying to find focus, and that'll change as long as you're in AFC, or servo as some cameras call it. All right, back. Let me get my camera off here, continue on with our little slideshow. In fact, actually, let's do this. Let's take a couple of, let me get rid of the screen here for you. All right, so let's take a couple of questions here. One of the questions somebody had said is, what are the hard drives on the back there? That's I've got, basically, I put all my photos onto a drive, and the other drive is the backup drive. I use a program called Carbon Copy on the Mac. I'm not, I know PC has them. I'm not sure if it works on the PC as well, but so, you know, photo drive one, put all my photos on there, and it copies it to, you know, however often I need it to, copies it, mirrors my backup drive to it. And then I also use I use a cloud service called Backblaze that backs up everything on you know, every drive that I have attached here. So I don't do RAID, I don't do NAT, I don't know, I can't even spell that stuff. So too complicated for me. Simple, put them on one drive, copy them to another one. The reason why you see 4 drives there is because all of my course material and all my videos go, that's my backup system for the other stuff, which you guys probably wouldn't have there. Let's see here. So pardon my having to look over here. Just my second screen is over there. A couple of questions about some tax. I'll make sure that Tyler takes care of that a little bit later on. Matt, when does the 70 to 200 ship? I don't know. Let's see here. Are you shooting in manual? Yes. What role does there? I knew this question. You can't talk about focus without getting into the religiously political debate about back button focus. So here's all I'm going to say to back button focus, guys, is number one, when that photo's hanging on the wall, okay, or that beautiful photo is up on your screen, nobody can tell you whether or not you had back button focus on, okay? So back button focus, it doesn't help your focus system focus better. It doesn't help your focus system focus faster. It doesn't fool your focus system into doing something that not turning. And if you're not familiar with it, excuse me, if you're not familiar with it, it's basically setting up a button on the back of the camera, hence back button. Setting up a button on the back to be in charge of focusing. Right now, most of your cameras out of the box, the shutter not only takes the picture, but focuses. And some people like to override that to where the shutter only takes the picture and you press the back button on the back of the camera to do the focusing. So just keep in mind, it will not make your focus system better. It doesn't fool it into make it better. It's just simply a different way to do it. A lot of people, it's taken from back in the film days. It's taken from back in older cameras that didn't have the autofocus system that we have today. And it was really, if you do any research on back button focus, it was created for one primary reason, and that was focus and recompose. You have got a person standing in front of a mountain, you focus, and then you recompose. It was created for that. We can argue whether or not you need that today. I don't believe you do, because I believe the camera's autofocus systems take care of that for you. So I don't personally use back button focus, and mainly because my thumb is doing a lot of stuff on the back of the camera. While I'm shooting, between exposure, compensation, and all the other things we can do, I don't want my thumb to be in charge of actually focusing. And I don't want to press 2 buttons down to take a picture. I'd rather just press the shutter button down. But again, it's, you know, people use it and swear by it, and that's by all means okay. I would say try it out, see which way that works best for you. It's going to be different for everybody. Let's see here. How would you approach a bird going from a dark foreground to a bright sky? Again, auto ISO will generally take care of that. Some people prefer to set their exposure based on the bird, and regardless of what background it's changing, doesn't really change the overall exposure. I personally have better luck with auto ISO. Okay. All right, let's go jump back in here to our presentation. Okay. Moving on. So in the last section, we talked about focus modes. We talked about single versus continuous. Also, just to provide a little bit of clarity, when we're talking about continuous, we're not talking about continuous shooting or frame rate. All right, that's a whole separate, that's generally called drive mode on your camera. And I had mentioned that in the very beginning, you know, about your frames per second. So just keep that in mind, that your frame rate has nothing to do with your focus. Your frame rate is simply how many pictures you are taking per second, okay? Has nothing to do with focus. So now we're going to cover the other part of it, which is focus area, okay? So with focus area, what you have is we chose our focus mode. Now we have to tell the camera where to focus. When we choose our focus mode, single or continuous, we're not telling the camera where to focus. We're just telling it how often to focus and when to focus. Focus area, now you're telling it where to focus, okay? And you're gonna have a lot of different options for this. Between cameras, it's gonna be different. So you're generally, all cameras have a single small point of some sort, all right? And then you can move that small point around, which may be good for a perched bird, but for a bird in flight, it'd be really difficult for you to move that point around, okay? So I always tell people, start with as small of a point as possible, work your way up. For a perched bird, again, those small single points, we can move them around, they'll be just fine. And then if maybe you move that point into the center and you try to keep it on the bird as it's flying, then that becomes harder. And the closer the bird is to you, the harder that becomes. The faster the bird is, the harder that becomes. So then we start moving into a zone or a wide type of a situation. And then a lot of cameras have a tracking mode to it as well. So I know on Sony's got a tracking mode, which essentially just says, hey, if I'm in zone and it locks focus on something, if it goes out of the zone, continue tracking it. That's simply all that tracking mode really means. But I'm going to generally end up somewhere in a zone type of a focus situation, wide, and you'll see in the video that I have for you, you'll see a lot of those, explained and shown here. So there's benefits to each one of them. Again, there is no one size fits all to this, but hopefully this little video that I have for you will help make a little bit more sense there. So what you're seeing here is I've got a video monitor attached to one of the ports in the camera. So I'm actually recording what I see through the viewfinder. So this is exactly what I'm seeing as I'm taking pictures. And you can see all those little green dots, that's focus points, okay? When you're shooting with mirrorless, you will get to see these focus points. They're there in a DSLR camera. That's why whenever it says it's got 2 and 3 and 400 focus points or whatever, these points are there. You're just not seeing them in an optical viewfinder because it's basically a glass view of the world. It's not an electronic view, but an electronic viewfinder, which is what most mirrorless cameras have, will show you this. Okay, so you can see this camera has bird eye autofocus as well, which if you're close enough, it'll work great. But I mean, it's very few cameras have that right now, and most cameras will do great with your autofocus. But you'll know, you can see all these little green dots when you have your focus modes set up this correct way, you'll see what's happening. Okay, you'll actually see. The nice thing about this aspect of it, if you're photographing, if you're shooting with a mirrorless camera, is that you actually know if you have an in-focus shot before you even go review your photo. All right, so as I'm shooting, as long as I'm shooting at 1/3200th of a second, which I know freezes the action, I don't even have to go look at it to know that the shot is in focus. Here's a good example where I'm on a wide focus area and there's some trees and branches and other moving things and it's picking up the wrong thing. But as soon as I go to the center zone, you can see it picks it up. And then if the bird puts its head down, it doesn't know what to focus on, but eventually it finds it again because it's limited to a lot smaller area to look for that focus. So I'm not confusing the camera as much as I would if it were a wide focus zone. So this isn't a great example of where I would use wide. Because there are just so many different contrasty things in there. Now, as we switch over to something like this, you can see I've got that center focus zone, but the osprey's head goes out of it sometimes as it picks its head up. So you see it loses it, but as soon as I nudge that center zone up, I say it's center zone, but it's a zone. As soon as I nudge it up, now my keeper rate is much higher because it knows just where to look. All right. Take that example a little bit further, you can see I'm now purposely moving the camera around, trying to force the bird out of the zone, as you can see here. So as I move it out, sometimes you'll see it loses focus on it, or it reverts to other autofocus points that don't necessarily pick up the eye. But disregard the eye in that, and that's just the way your focus points will work. Whether it has eye autofocus or not, the point is that it's looking in that zone for something to be in focus. And as soon as I switch it to that wide area, now you can see as I start pressing the shutter halfway down to focus, of course, this has the eye focus, so it's finding the eye. But if it wasn't turned on, it would simply use those focus points on the bird. But look how far and how far out to the edges it actually goes. Okay, so hopefully those videos help give you a little bit of an idea of some of those things. It's going to be different for all of your cameras. What I will say is this is one of the areas where I feel that mirrorless makes bird and wildlife photography easier, is because we have the ability to actually see what's being focused on. You know, we know before, we know while we're taking the shot. I know that if I have my shutter speed set to 1/3200th of a second and I saw the green dot on the bird, I know it's in focus. I don't even have to go look and review it, because you know. So you get that feedback, which is nice about the mirrorless cameras. DSLR still, again, there's still plenty. I have taken many amazing photos, as have many great wildlife photographers out there with a DSLR camera. It's just, I think the feedback you get with your mirrorless is one of the big selling points for me. Okay, so on that topic, let's just talk a little bit about gear, just suggested gear. We can, again, this will take on a quasi-political religious debate here, so we can go back and forth. So I'm just going to kind of keep it general. Talked a little bit about DSLR mirrorless, crop versus full frame. So you've got when you think about some of the trade-offs, we've got trade-offs when it comes to our DSLR and mirrorless crops versus full frames. So your mirrorless cameras are going to give you some of that feedback. They're going to give you, I think that what you see is what you get. And this is one of the big things, is it's the electronic viewfinder, right? So the electronic viewfinder is letting you see the exposure that you are currently taking, where DSLR is giving you the optical viewfinder. So you're seeing the world as it exists, but your exposure could be very, very different. So some people like it one way or another. I personally, after going with the electronic viewfinder, I could never, ever go back to, not to essentially, again, you see the optical view of the world, but you're not actually seeing what your camera's going to take. So that to me is one of the biggest things there. You're going to notice a lot of your technology is just going toward mirrorless. It just seems to be where camera companies are putting their efforts. And then crop versus full frame. So one of there's trade-offs with all of this stuff. Your full frame cameras tend to have better frame rate. Your full frame cameras tend to have better ISO performance. They tend to have better quality. They tend to have better autofocus options in them. It doesn't mean that a full frame is better at focusing than a crop. It means that the camera companies are typically putting better autofocus and better options into the full frame camera. Okay, so it's not a better picture, it's not a sharper picture, it's not anything. It just means that's where the camera companies are really investing, is those full frame cameras that, again, give you a little bit better performance. And full frame is typically always going to have better high ISO performance than a crop frame camera will. Lenses. So, ideal range. I mean, guys, this is impossible because everybody is in a different situation. I can tell you that in most of my bird photography outings, I can never have a long enough lens. Every once in a while, that doesn't mean that I can't get close, but every once in a while I can. But most of the time, I can never get a long enough lens. So for me, my ideal range is going to be that 400 to 600 area, and even higher. If I can get to 800, with a teleconverter, then even better. Zoom versus prime. I personally use my Sony 200 to 600 every day, all day long. I think it is a wonderful lens. I know Canon's got a 1 to 500. That's excellent. I got a lot of Canon R5 shooters that go to some frequent areas here where I photograph birds. The Canon R5 is the camera of choice there, and a lot of them use that zoom lens. I know there's a lot of 150 to 600s out there. So I know Nikon has a 200 to 500 that people swear by. And I'll use a teleconverter all day long. I have no problem using a teleconverter. So just to review a couple of photos with you, but just to kind of show you, this was taken with a Sony all-in-one camera. You can't even change the lenses on it, but just to show you, you can still get great quality from a lot of this stuff. This is taken with a Sony a7R III and a 200 to 600 millimeter lens, which is my favorite lens of all. This is taken with a 200 to 600. I mean, look at, if you set yourself up right, look at the bokeh and the blur and the quality that you can get with a lens like that. Again, 200 to 600, razor sharp. 100 to 400 with a 1.4 teleconverter. And you tell me that a teleconverter makes it soft, because that is as razor sharp as can be. Again, another teleconverter shot, 100 to 400. This is with a 600 millimeter prime. This is with a 600 millimeter prime. All I'll tell you about the primes is I do take mine out from time to time. It's so big, it's so heavy. I make sure I limit it to situations where I know I am not going to have to stand there and hold it the whole time, or I'm going to be able to bring a tripod. And I don't often like to bring a tripod or a monopod because they slow me down. But the places I go to, things just happen too fast, so they slow me down. So for me, isn't it funny, like a guy with the 600 saying, don't buy a 600, and I have one, and I love it, but at the same time, if you want to know what stays on my camera the most, it's the 2 to 600, because it is the most versatile. A little bit, just some general lens things here just to be aware of. Focus range limiter, that will greatly help you, especially if you're in like a backyard bird situation where you've got birds and little trees and things. The focus range limiter, if you've ever been there and seen your focus pick up on something way off in the distance when the bird is close by, or seen your focus keep picking up on branches that are close by and not pick up on something in the distance, that's where your focus range limiter can come in. You can tell it where to focus. Image stabilization, guys, you're gonna have to look in your camera manuals and your lens manuals for this, because there is a different recommendation for everything. People say once you're above 1/1000th, 1/2000th, 1/30, there's a different setting that everybody says, and once you're above it, it doesn't really matter. I can tell you that I'm generally going to turn, if I'm at 1/3200th of a second, I'm generally going to turn image stabilization off. Where I will turn it on is if I'm doing a lot of slow shutter speed panning. So if I'm doing slow shutter speed panning, then I will turn image stabilization on. And when I say slow shutter speed panning, I'm doing 1/30th of a second, 1/60th of a second, trying to get that background to be motion blurred as I follow a bird. And that is where your image stabilization steady shot can come in. And then don't forget, your lens generally has preset buttons on it, so use them. You can set these things to do a lot of different settings for you. Explore your camera. You bought this big expensive camera, and if you haven't explored these things, then you bought the big expensive camera only to not use what you paid for. So I would explore those lens preset buttons, because there's very quick things you can do. I have mine set to basically crop mode so I can spot in on something. It gives me a little bit extra reach. I won't shoot in crop mode because there's no reason to. It doesn't give you extra reach. It just simply crops in the camera, which you can always crop later on, and I'd recommend that. All right, so if we're thinking, kind of baseline gear, I'm going to say like a Sony, like in something in the A6000 line, is going to be your bottom, like I almost think of it as entry level, but you can still take great photos with it. There's still lots of good lenses that go along with it. Sony makes a great crop sensor, 75 to 350. I know Sony is sponsoring this, so of course you can always look at what your counterparts are for your other cameras. And then most camera companies make a big megapixel camera. So in Sony, it's the R line, the A7R line, and the A7R4 is currently where you're at. And then a lot of camera companies make a smaller megapixel fast action camera. So that's going to be your A9 series in Sony. I believe that's your R6 series in Canon. I'm not quite sure what Nikon kind of lost me recently with some of the new updates, so I haven't heard enough about them to really see. And then Sony has the A1. I know Canon's coming out or has a similar competitor to it, which is all-in-one. It does everything. Big megapixel sensor, fast frame rate, fast autofocus. And then you can see my lens choices there. So I'm always going to go with the 200 to 600. 100 to 400 if I think I'm going to be really close, which I usually never am, and the 600 only if I know I'm not going to need have anything come close to me, and I have some place where I can, you know, put it down on a tripod. All right, a couple of tips for you here. So auto ISO, talked about that a little bit before. Another tip to consider, if you look at number 6 and number 7 that are on the screen here, probably the two biggest things if you're out and about, if you're past a backyard bird situation and you're out and about photographing birds, or you're thinking of going somewhere to photograph birds, sun at your back, wind at your back. It's not a rule. All right. And in fact, I can joke around about it. There's a place I go to here in near Tampa called Fort DeSoto, and I can joke around about it and say, like, I was sitting there one morning and I heard these guys coming up and I could hear them. And because I have this spot where I try to get some backlit, some white egrets. I try to get some against a dark background, and the sun comes up behind these dark trees. And so I'll shoot into the sun trying to get them backlit with that really dark background. I know exactly what I'm doing. I know exactly why I'm there. I know exactly why I'm shooting into the sun. But these guys came by and they didn't realize the wind, the way the wind direction was, it was carrying their voices, and I could hear them talking about me and kind of making fun of me. And so I kind of just looked over. I was like, hey guys, thanks for the concern. I was like, I'm good. I'm actually trying to do this right now. So, but in general, sun at your back, because that's going to light the bird. If you're shooting into the sun, very, very difficult to get the shots that we want unless the sun is low in the sky. And then wind at your back. Birds typically like to take off, land, do their fishing, do everything into the wind. Okay, so they'll be flying into the wind. So sun at your back, wind at your back, wind in your face, butt in your face. If the wind is in your face, you're going to get a lot of butt shots of birds. And again, it's usually going to be your bigger birds, your smaller birds. And if you're out in the backyard, I'm not necessarily sure I would worry too much about the wind. But if you're out there trying to photograph bigger birds, I know whenever I go to the beach, I look at the wind direction. If I'm going there at sunrise and the wind direction is not in the right direction, I won't even go. Okay, because I know I'm just going to be pointed at the sun with a whole lot of butts in my face the whole time. Get low. Another one here, look for background separation. So as we look at some of the things here, this is shooting kind of this. You can't see the sun, but it's up there behind the clouds. There's nothing you can do with this, guys. There's just no editing in the world can take care of shots like this. Yeah, it was great. I had some eagles battling in the air, but they're black. And no matter how much I edit, sure, I can pump open the shadows. It's never, ever going to look good. Don't think you can edit your way out of bad light. You can't. You can help a lot of different things with editing. You cannot edit away bad light. Talked about shooting position. So eye level, if you can get there. So get down low, get down at eye level. You'll get some really impactful photos if you can do that. And then separation, if you're shooting, this goes almost hand in hand with shooting level, not always, but background separation, you can see pointing down at birds, or if the background is really, really close to them, you don't get that nice blur. You get a very contrasty, a very cluttered type of a photo because you're not blurring out the background. You're pointing down, the ground right behind them becomes the background. So we want to try to get a little bit of separation. You can see up at the top there, you have no control over something like that. So I just thought it was cool with the baby owl, and I have zero control over background separation in that situation. But in other situations, the osprey on the beach on the right there, I positioned myself so that I knew when it would fly, that I positioned myself that I knew that I was shooting in a direction where I could get that background separation. Okay, let's do just a couple of quick editing tips here. I'll just show you a quick workflow that starts inside of Lightroom, jumps over into Photoshop. So I'm in the develop module in Lightroom. And at this point, I would say you're going to do all of your basic editing. If you wanted to maybe open up the exposure here a little bit, open up the shadows a little bit. In doing so, it's going to make my background brighter. So we've got some really excellent new tools here. It's called the masking tools. Okay, it's the same tools we always had. If you click on the little masking icon here inside of Lightroom, if you haven't seen this stuff, it is flat out amazing. It came out the end of October. So we still have our brush and our gradients like we always have. We still have color range and luminance range, but we also have select subject and select sky. So in this case, I could go to select subject and I can make the subject brighter or darker. But in this case, I don't want to do that. What I want to use select subject for would be to go over and click on the little pop-out menu and choose invert. Now I have the background selected, and now I can make that background a little bit darker. And that is all of my wildlife editing. All of my wildlife editing, because if a portrait photographer will always get to choose, they will always use lighting, they will always use the light in their favor to light their subject and not draw attention to the background. Okay, they point lights at the subject, they don't point lights at their feet and the ground and the background. We don't get that option out in nature. So a big part of my wildlife editing is always going to be to draw attention to the subject, take attention away from the background or other cluttered areas in there. So in this case, I can make that background a little bit darker. I can make it a little bit more saturated if I want to. All these adjustments here are just focused on that background. Okay. So really, really interesting stuff with this new masking. And then you could always subtract from it too. You've got add and subtract. So I could click on subtract. I could take the brush tool. I could hit the right bracket key. So now I'm in subtract mode. And if I think it looks a little too cut out, I could always, in fact, no, I'm actually going to add on this one here. Let's go add with the brush. So if I think it looks too cut out, I can add a little bit of darkness around those wings, like so, just with the brush. Okay, so really, again, really powerful stuff that we can do with these masking adjustments that we have here. Overall, a little bit more exposure. Contrast, do all of your basic settings. If you had to crop, I believe this is, I don't need to crop this photo, but if you had to crop, you would do all that here. I would say for me, if you're going to do your detail, if you're going to do your sharpening and noise reduction in Lightroom, you could do it here. I don't. So for my wildlife photography, I don't do this for my landscapes because you generally don't need to. But for my wildlife photography, I'll pull off the sharpening and the noise reduction right there inside of Lightroom. If I need Photoshop, I'm going to go to Photoshop to do my noise reduction and distraction removal. If I don't need Photoshop, I would go into Lightroom and I would simply use my plugins from here. And I use one from Topaz called Topaz Denoise. Okay, so if I could do that from Lightroom because I don't need Photoshop, great. In this case, I need Photoshop because I want to remove a little bit of a distraction here. So we'll just hop over there. Again, I'm not going to make a long drawn out thing of this, but this is the point you would do it. And I'll go and I'll take, let's say, my healing brush. The way the healing brush works is you sample, you Option or Alt click to sample an area, and then you paint. And it removes it. Pretty simple. Option or Alt click to sample, and then paint. Okay. Sometimes when I get near edges, I find the healing brush doesn't work as well. So you'll see if I get down near here, it starts to get things very smudgy, right? So when that happens, I switch from the mode up at the top left here. Again, remember I'm using the healing brush, not the spot healing brush. I switch this mode to replace. And when I switch that to replace, it respects the edges a lot better. Okay. I think in big open areas like I had before, the normal mode that we started with works better. But when it comes to using anything that gets near an edge, I think that replace mode tends to work better. So now I'll press Command or Control J, and that will make a duplicate copy of this. I'll go to Filter. Again, I would do this from Lightroom as a plugin if I didn't need Photoshop. I wouldn't go into Photoshop to do this, but since I'm here, it's easier. So I'll just go to Filter, Topaz Denoise. There are other ones out there. I've tried them all. I find Topaz Denoise to be the best, but as always, use whatever works for you. It doesn't, if you find something that works better, by all means, give it a try. So this is my go-to plugin for this stuff here. It does a little bit of AI to figure out what I should do here. And what I'll usually do is I'll go into compare mode and I'll change this so I can see the eyes. And then what this does is this gives me a couple of different models, because Topaz has several different models: standard, clear, low light, severe noise. They've got these different models. And when I go into their compare mode, then I can see what each one of them will do to the photo. So I don't have to keep trying, switching back and forth. So in this case, I think standard's probably doing the best. So I'll go back into this view. So standard for me does the best job in this one. And then when we come down here to our settings, I usually won't mess with them. There's an auto setting, and I'll usually let it take care of doing the auto settings. Remember, there's AI involved in all of this stuff, but you can always adjust it. And I will typically adjust a little bit of the sharpness there. So a lot of people will ask, so when do you sharpen? If the noise reduction is the worst problem, which it typically is in my wildlife photography, if I have a blurry wildlife photography, even if I could salvage it, I usually don't, because I'm just not happy, because I know that I failed. So, but noise reduction is typically the biggest problem. And noise reduction with Topaz does a great amount of sharpening. So I typically won't do any sharpening. If I don't have any noise issues and it's just a little bit soft, then I'll use Topaz Sharpen AI instead. But you can see this is our original, and that's the after. So before, after. It was a sharp photo, it's just noisy. So I'm able to remove that noise, and it does a nice bit of sharpening. You just hit apply, and that'll render the image, and that'll take it right back over into Photoshop for you. And then once it gets there, to continue your workflow, once it gets back to Photoshop, all you got to do is just hit File, Save. Okay, and that'll make a copy of the image, and then it'll save it back over into Lightroom. And so eventually down here, you're going to see a duplicate copy pop up. That's going to be our new version of the photo. So you'll have your original, and then you'll have your new version right next to it. Okay, so that's a quick workflow option for you here. Let's blow through this. All right, so one quick thing, guys. I had mentioned before, I do all kinds of courses over on the website. So if you ever want to visit at mattk.com, I do have one on wildlife editing. So if you liked anything you saw there, I've got a course on it. And I actually have a recently released bird photography course. So if you're interested in that, you can swing by the website. If you just go to mattk.com and you click on courses, you'll see all the courses on the page there. But keep in mind also, there is some really good, hold on, let me go, there we go. We left our cyber weekend sales up there, so you'll see a lot of really good discounts. I had a discount code on there, and then I realized for you guys, and I realized the discount code wasn't as good as the sale prices that we ran for the Black Friday cyber weekend stuff there. So if you are interested, swing by the website, mattk.com. There's a lot of good deals on some wildlife and bird photography courses. I think we are about ready to finish up with some questions here. I'll just go through them if that's cool with you. I know we have Tyler here. If there's one that he needs, then I can get him in on this one. Maybe I'll let him in on the end to talk a little bit about some of the Bedford specific questions inside of there. Let's see here. So somebody asked, when do I use crop mode? I don't use crop mode. All crop mode does on your camera, okay, is your camera has a resolution. Let's call it 4,000 by 3,000 just to make numbers easy. Your camera has a resolution. When you switch to crop mode, you're not getting more reach. All your camera's doing is saying, okay, let me crop the sensor. So your sensor was this big. Now your sensor is this big. Now you only get 2,000 by 1,000 photo. It's the same exact thing as if you took that 4,000 by 3,000 sized uncrop moded photo, opened it up into Photoshop and Lightroom, and cropped in. You're not getting more reach. Everybody thinks you're getting more reach. You're not getting more reach. You're getting the appearance of more reach, but you're just getting less megapixels. That's all. So I personally don't do it. I'd rather have the whole photo and I can crop later if I need to, rather than switching to crop mode, which has happened to me, and forgetting about it. And all of a sudden a bird flies in really close and I'm too cropped in and I can't get the shot. I'm starting to clip wings because I forgot that I switched over into crop mode. So I don't personally see a reason to use it. Somebody says, what monitor do I use? So this is a BenQ monitor. I absolutely can't stand it. So I recently switched over to a new MacBook Pro. If you go to mackk.com, you click on blog, there's a couple of blog posts about some of that. You can find out the specs and everything. But I recently switched over to a new MacBook Pro. I had an iMac. I switched over to a new MacBook Pro. And so now I don't have my nice, bright, glossy, glassy iMac screen anymore. I have a BenQ. That's my print proofing monitor. So I do some printing, and I only use it for print proofing. I absolutely hate the way photos look on it, but they proof very well for print because print just doesn't have the color and the reproduction that a photo on screen does. So I absolutely can't stand it. I am either looking at the new or not. I'm looking at the LG 27-inch ultrafine 5K or the Apple XDR, which is ridiculously priced. But keep in mind, I sit in front of my computer 8 to 10 hours a day. It's more than I sleep. So when you frame it that way, it's an amazing screen. So I'm trying to figure out which one to get. Let's see here. Moving on. Does the animal human setting work for bird photography, specifically for movement? So a lot of cameras are coming out with bird eye autofocus, and most cameras have already had human eye autofocus. So I keep on my Sony, I keep bird eye autofocus on all the time. If it doesn't find the eye in what you saw in the videos, it will revert to something else, but it will track as that eye moves. And again, I played a video, you saw it will track. If it doesn't find it, it reverts. I'm not sure how Canon works. Somebody told me that Canon actually works a little bit different, that you have to do either or. So I could be wrong. I'm not quite sure about that one, but all I can tell you is in the Sony, I turn bird eye autofocus on. I leave it on 100% of the time. If it finds it, great. If it doesn't find it, then I just know that it reverts to my autofocus system, which works amazing. So I never really had a problem with it to begin with. So I find I don't even think about bird eye. It's not for a fast moving bird. It's never going to work, more because I'm not going to keep the bird centered in the frame, but it can be useful, especially for perched birds, I find. Let's see here. Talked about ISO. Somebody had said, is there a better time of year for bird photos? It's going to be different everywhere. So I'd say do a little bit of research there. I know that here in Florida, like eagles and osprey, winter and spring are really good months. I know small birds, winter and spring tends to be really good months. But then I know many places where the summer months can be really good too. So I'd say it's a little bit of everything. It also geographically depends where you're located. I think the website is ebird.com. Look up eBird. I don't know if it's a .com or a .org. Look up eBird. It's a great website to tell you where bird sightings are in different parts of the world, and all parts of the world. So it's got a really big community to it. So I definitely take a look at that. Let's see here. So I'm going to end the questioning here for a moment. Let's see here. Somebody said, is there a better time of day for bird photography? I would say, I'm usually going to try to be out morning or late afternoon when the sun's lower in the sky. Problem when the sun gets really high in the sky is it starts to create a lot of shadows. So number one, you could be shooting straight into it. Number two, it does create very contrasty shadows. Overcast days, I love a partly cloudy day. I love a day with a lot of big white puffy clouds, because then you get a lot of breaks from direct sunlight and you get really evenly lit photos. So that's really my favorite type of a day is is just partly cloudy with big white puffy wispy clouds. Man, it's like a natural softbox. You can just get really soft light on everything, and it lights everything completely rather than a wing. A bird puts up a wing and it casts a harsh shadow down it or something like that. So, but I'm usually going to be out morning, later afternoon, toward the edges of the day, or on partly cloudy days, I'll shoot all day long. It's, it doesn't really matter. So, all right, I'm going to turn this over to Tyler just to take care of any Bedford specific stuff.
There we are. Hello, hello. Yeah, so Bedford has a few different deals going on with Sony. So we have a bundle deal with the A7 III. So you're talking 10 frames a second, 24 megapixels. So I've done some bird photography with that particular camera, and it's fantastic. So there are some extra goodies with that if you go to bedfords.com, BEDFORDS, as well as the Alpha 1 if you want high speed as well as high resolution. The Alpha 1's the way to go. We are doing a free memory card with that. That's a CF Express Type A card, as well as free expedited shipping. And I was just given a message. If you're wanting to order something before Christmas, make sure it's there before Christmas. I know shipping has been a whole mess in the past 2 years, but we're saying if you could please get your order in by December 15th. So you have 5 more days to get that in to pretty much guarantee that you are going to get that by Christmas, if that's going to be a gift for somebody.
All right. So, so somebody asked where I got my shirt. lifeisgood.com, I think, is the website. So, I live down near the beach here in Florida, so there's a lot of beach stores that carry this brand. But there's a website that's got lots of fun ones on there. So you'll trust me, you'll get stuck on the website for like an hour, looking at all the t-shirts you can get. A lot of people, somebody asked difference between A9, A9 II, basically same camera. There's a couple of minor upgrades and network capability and something else in there. So I'd say, get whatever one is easy to get for you. I say, as it comes to a wildlife photographer, don't tell Sony I said this, but I mean, you still get an A9 and you'll basically have the same camera. I don't know that anything changed in the autofocus or the ISO performance or anything. I will say that, especially if you can get a free memory card, if you're a Sony shooter, that A1, which is crazy priced, will put a smile on your face immediately. I tell everybody that, and everybody that gets it writes me back and says, it was a tough pill to swallow, and I would never go back and trade it at this point. So keep that in mind. Let's see. I think we just a lot of thanks, and looks like we got everything going on in there. So I'm going to throw this up one more time too, guys. So swing by the website also, matk.com, if you're interested in anything in there. As I think my wife does all the sales and stuff, so I guess she left like the holiday sales up, so now is probably a good time to grab some of those courses that are on there. A big thanks to everybody over at Bedford's for having me. And again, seriously, that I heard that special, you get the CF card. Those things are expensive, so that's a really good deal on that one. But hope you guys all have a Merry Christmas, Happy Holiday, all that fun stuff. Thanks so much for giving me some time out of your day. I hope you have a great weekend. And if you want to find out more, if you got a question also, if you go to matk.com, there's a little contact thing on there. So I know I didn't get to answer every question here, but if you have a question that's really looming over you and I didn't get to it here, feel free to just go to the website or any of my social media pages, and you can get in touch with me there. So hope you guys have a great rest of your day, and we'll talk to you again soon.